Welcome to another DragonLance Saga review episode. It is Lenara's Flora Green the 11th. My name is Adam, and I'm going to give you my review of Knights of the Sword by Roland Green today. First, let me just start by saying Happy Mother's Day to anyone who has a mother. Might be one or two of you out there. Even if they're past, take a moment and reflect. All right, I would like to take a moment also and thank the DL Saga members and invite you to consider becoming a member by visiting the link in the description below. You can even pick up Dragonlance Gaming materials using my affiliate links. This is my perspective only. If yours differs, that's okay. We all have our own opinions. That's called life. And we don't have to be hostile about it. We can just accept that they exist. Believe it or not, that is a thing in this world. So, if you have a differing opinion, or if you just have thoughts, or you have loud cars out your open window, jeez, leave a comment below. All right, let me get into this. There's not a whole lot, like the previous reviews, I listen to the audiobook when I'm going to and from work. And so I don't have time to write down a full play-by-play like I have in the past. But that being said, this was infinitely better. Let me sort of adjust my fill light here. Infinitely better than the previous Knights of the Crown book, though it is still wildly flawed. Again, the cover doesn't really have anything to do with the contents. You can make an argument that maybe it does in circumstances, but it really doesn't. And the title, Knights of the Sword. There was like one at the very beginning, very end. Even Pirvan is a Knight of the Crown still. So I don't know why it's called Knight of the Sword. It's very, very odd. But you know what? It's just a stupid little pulp fantasy novel. So if we accept that, then we can get past the sort of silly ridiculousness. There are a couple of notes that I think I kind of want to bring up. First of all, Roland Green thinks that mages can make healing potions and heal people. I don't know why this was a problem in the original novel. Apparently, the editor didn't tell him anything, and then he continues that throughout this novel. I can move past it, but it's just such a simple correction that I don't know why it's even there. You know, if you did any research at all into fantasy or Dragonlance or Dungeons and Dragons, you would know this. Any. It seems so simple. All right. And then, of course, Hipperon is now a bronze dragon instead of a copper dragon. That's a bit odd. The strength of this is that it's a political story based around pre-cataclysmic and pre-Istarian dominance, even though it's sort of getting to that point in the story. And so we're getting a sense of the land, the world of Ansalon in Krynn before the King Priest took over. And again, the King Priest novels, which are a brilliant trilogy of novels, are the only other series that I am aware of that talks about pre-cataclysm Ansalon in this area about Istar, dealing with Istar and stuff. And so this gives you a really great insight into the small steps, which then spiral into large steps of how Istar fell and how the King Priest really sealed his own and everyone else's demise by thinking he was greater or more powerful than the gods and demonizing other races and destroying other faiths. We get that beginnings here and seeing the lengths that Istar will go to silence opposing voices. That's what is the real strength behind this novel, not what actually happens. Though the battles are okay and the characters are interesting enough. Roland Green is really strange when it comes to writing like sex scenes. There's a lot of like romantic and sort of lust passages that are just like weird. And I don't know if he's just a strange cat, and hey, I don't kink shame, but he talked about teeth for a while. Weird. Just weird. All right, so basically the setup is this. There is this outlaw band led by basically like a rogue, a minotaur that's been cast out of their society named Waydile. And he's taken on this human and sort of training him in the ways of minotaur honor named Derek. But anyway, they're this band that travels around and just sort of ransacks different towns in Carthay. Carthay is one of the nations or one of the city-states, I should say, that's sort of separate from Istar at this point, but still not like a rival or anything like that. The problem is that if this band continues to assault Carthay, then Istar, in order to protect itself, is going to dispatch its navy to then blockade any type of warband activity and stop it, right? If Istar does that, then Carthay doesn't have the rights to go out and have it's basically like a blockade, like at the beginning of Star Wars Episode 1, where they would then have to confront the Istarian ships in order to get the rights to go in and ship in and out of Carthaean waters, because, of course, Istar would be there blockading, protecting, supposedly, from Minotaur invasion or pirate invasion. So what this would mean is that Istar would then strike back because, again, they want dominance in all this area. So this is trying to prevent a war between Istar and Carthay because of this Minotaur sort of outcast band that's marauding the countryside and the coastline. So Sir Pirvan the Wayward, is sent off as a Knight of the Crown, as basically like a diplomat, to go and try to either reason with or crush this banded resistance in order to prevent Istar from maneuvering and stop Carthay from reacting. So this is all to stop a war because Istar is trying to do power grabs. We get to see stuff like Istarian assassins. We get to see stuff like really twisted Kender, almost having like Stockholm syndrome in this story. We get a really great example of Minotaur honor. Again, it's all taken originally by from like Kaz the Minotaur and Huma Dragonbane. But it's carried through in this, where even though the Minotaur is exiled from his own land, he does have a semblance of honor, and he's teaching this other human orphan what that means. And it's kind of interesting seeing a Minotaur adopting a human and teaching it his ways, and seeing the human sort of reacting that way. Of course, we get a bunch of the old friends from the previous novel, if you liked them, which was a lot of fun. So you get Waydal, Pirvan, you get Hymea, Jamar the Fair, you get the Mage Terathin, you get the black-robed Rubina, Epron, a mercenary captain. You get a bunch of really interesting characters in here. It falls flat in the writing, it falls flat in the lore, but if you can get past that, it's a really interesting, geographically inspired. It's not quite like a thriller, but it's definitely set up in order to prevent an ongoing war from a power-hungry Istar. And with that as the backdrop, it definitely makes it worth checking out if you're a fan of this era of Dragonlance, the pre-Cataclysm era. And if you are okay with stuffy writing and titles that mean nothing to the content of the story, it's really made me curious in wanting to finish the final two books in this Pirvan quad series. I don't know what you would call a series of 4 books. Quadology? I don't know. In any case, it actually makes me want to read those so I can understand why, and I'm sure I'll be disappointed, why they named these Knight of the Crown, Knight of the Sword, Knight of the Rose, and then Wayward Knights. Because this is all like leading up to the Cataclysm, and it's all happening in like sort of tertiary time. And that makes it really interesting. If this story was set out like way back when Solamnia first became a nation, or way later after the War of the Lance, it would not be interesting at all. But because of the time it's set in, because of the world events that are happening simultaneously, and if you're aware of Dragonlance lore happening at this time, you're going to get a lot more out of this novel than I think a cursory reader would. Because the world exists, and there are things happening in it that are hinted at in this that really make it flesh out to be an interesting read. So that's kind of my thoughts about this. You get a lot of stuff like Zeboim and Habakkuk sort of followers and worshippers sort of vying for control and power when you're doing the high seas stuff. And that's interesting because ultimately you don't really think of the gods in stark opposition outside of wars, right? I mean, you just think, well, their priests are their priests and theirs are theirs, and never the twain shall meet. But when you're dealing with mariner societies, you have to realize that it doesn't matter whether you worship Zeboim. If you're a sailor, you still have to pay tribute to her because she commands the seas. And if you happen to worship Habakkuk, then he is also, oversees the sea on the good side. You have to then placate him as well. And to see the dynamic, we're always presented with this idea in Dragonlance of the stark opposition between like the wizards of high sorcery, white robes versus black robes, and good versus evil. And that's the whole dichotomy of neutrality and maintaining balance and stuff. You don't get that much when it comes to priests. At least, I can't think of any. Okay, Chronicles. I just shit on my own point. But beside that, you don't really get a lot of like Zeboim Habakkuk FaceTime, in opposition with their followers and stuff. And you get a little bit of that here. And I like that. And you still get that white robe v black robe or red robe v black robe type behavior. And just because you're a black robe, are you really evil? Or just because you pay tribute or acknowledge an evil god, are you really an evil person? It really takes cues from our own human history in like ancient Rome and Egypt, for example, and even Greece, where you would worship a whole pantheon of gods. And throughout the course of the year or certain holidays or events, you would then pay tribute to those different gods. And it wasn't really like you only focused on one, you were sort of acknowledging them all. And I like how that is played through with Dragonlance because it feels a little bit more real because that is our own human history experience. And it just makes for a more rich and inviting pantheon to inject religiosity into your games if you want to. And even more than that, it adds the complexities of where you lie in the stark contrast to other beings on the planet and how they're responding to that pantheon. Do they have one specific god that they're trying to further their goals? Or are you just trying to do your best to just live your life and placate them all in any given moment? I like that complexity. I think it's interesting. Hey, Chris, how you doing, man? So an entire series about Slantic Knights would be pretty cool, I think. And honestly, if they took this series, renamed it, and reframed it, it could make a very interesting Dragonlance series. Sort of pre-cataclysm thriller of this rising empire of Istar and their ultimate downfall, and how it affects the common man and the stability and trade between nations. It would be a very sort of Game of Thrones type story. And it would be wildly entertaining and interesting. And tons of people would watch it because though this writing isn't particularly great, the concepts behind it are. So you could get a screenwriter to come on and just, whip up some really great scripts. I think it would be amazing. I think it would really, really sell. And I wish Hollywood would get off their ass and start looking at these old pulp fantasy novels for the gold that they actually are in mining. You can just make money hand over fist. All right, so that is basically my review of this. DCBs, how you doing? Thanks for tuning in. It would depend on the deity they worship. Some deities were in direct conflict. You assume more hostility and less crossover with their worshipers and priests. Yeah, I mean, but I still do think that, it's like every Saturday morning cartoon, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. You would have the bad guy and the good guy team up to fight a greater threat. I could totally see stuff like that happening amongst the gods, especially when Istar starts destroying them all. And they're sending out their divine hammer to crush every god, first of evil, then of neutrality, then even of good. So at those points, you would definitely see the team-ups between the evil god's followers and the good god's followers in order to stop the madness that is happening in Istar, It's a really interesting time to try to explore some of those complexities of motivation and personality and perspective. I think because it can get really granular in that frame, that type of world frame. Anyway, I know we live in a black and white world where everyone has to hate anyone that doesn't think the way they do. I think that's total BS. but that seems to be pervasive in our culture right now. So I'd rather take a glimpse at life of saying, look, that's how you see things. I'd like to understand it. This is how I see it. We don't have to agree. We can just accept that we have different perspectives. I kind of would like to see how that would last, because once that Istarian threat is over, and you had those partners that were teamed up, do they go back to their stark opposition of each other, or do they have a more nuanced view of how the other perceives the world and the necessity that each opposing force is in order to maintain the balance of Krynn, which of course is the entire point of Dragonlance as a world, is the balance. So yeah, it could be pretty interesting. All right, well, that is it. I don't really have a lot of time to go into this simply because it's Mother's Day and I need to spend some time with my family. I'm trying to knock out all my projects before I spend the day with them. So that is it for my new review of Knights of the Sword by Roland Green. What do you think of the political setup in the novel? Do you enjoy reading about the ever-rising threat of Istar? And finally, do you think the titles of the novels should fit the content of them better? Feel free to email me at info@dlsaga.com or leave a comment below. I would like to take a moment and invite you to subscribe to this YouTube channel, ring the bell to get notified about upcoming videos, and click the like button. This all goes to help other Dragonlance fans learn about this channel and its content. This channel is all about celebrating the wonderful world of the Dragonlance Saga. Thank you so much for joining in that celebration. So, until next time, Slanjavar.